Welcome to the TubeClear system training video. In this video, we are going to learn how to set up and use your TubeClear system correctly. Please read the operator's manual before watching this video. Both reading your operator's manual and watching this video are required before using your TubeClear system. To get started, I would like to give you a brief background into the TubeClear system. The TubeClear system was developed to clear clogged feeding and decompression tubes at bedside while the tube remains in the patient. The TubeClear system works inside the feeding and decompression tube with a patented mechanical motion. The TubeClear system consists of a reusable control box and a single-use clearing stem. The control box moves a wire backward and forward inside of the clearing stem. This mechanical motion breaks up clogged material inside the feeding and decompression tube. Each control box is delivered with a power cord, a power supply, an IV pole mount adapter with clamp, an operator's manual, and this training video. Remember to read the entire operator's manual prior to use in addition to watching this training video. The first step will be to place the control box on a level surface or table, or use the IV pole mount to reduce the risk of the control box falling during use. If you're using the IV pole mount, secure the clamp onto an IV pole. Then, slide the receptacle located on the control box over the adapter on the clamp until you hear the retaining button click. If you would like to remove the control box from the IV pole mount after the procedure, simply pull the retaining button out while simultaneously lifting the control box upward. We will be keeping the control box on the IV pole mount. Now, move the control box within 2 feet of the patient for comfortable use. Next, we will plug the power cord into the power supply. Then we will take the other end of the power cord and plug it into a standard wall outlet. Now, plug the power supply into the power jack located on the control box, being sure that the pins on the power supply line up with the slots on the power jack. The final step in setting up the control box is to ensure that the control box is operational. By turning the power switch to the on position, a green light should illuminate. If a green light illuminates, the control box is ready for use. If a yellow light illuminates, do not use the TubeClear system and follow the instructions in the operator's manual. After the control box is set up, we will need to set up the clearing stem. If you are unable to determine your patient's tube characteristics, do not use the TubeClear system. Before we get started with setting up the clearing stem, it is important to note that clean techniques should be used throughout the procedure when handling the clearing stem. Therefore, do not allow the clearing stem to touch the floor or any other dirty surface. There are a few recommended ways to ensure that clean technique is used throughout the procedure. It is recommended that you wear gloves and safety glasses throughout the procedure, as you may come into contact with clogged content through the aspiration and irrigation steps. It is also recommended that you place a disposable pad over the patient's stomach and chest area to ensure that the clearing stem does not touch the patient or bedding. Third, when the clearing stem is not being used, it is recommended that it be coiled and placed back in its original packaging so that the clearing stem is out of the way during patency checks. There is a hole in the top of the bag for easy hanging on an IV pole. First, we are going to go over some important information about clearing stem setup. To start the setup of the clearing stem, you will need to recall the length of your patient's tube. The length of your patient's tube is important to identify because it will be used to determine the placement of the depth limiter. The depth limiter must be attached to the clearing stem at the location which matches your patient's tube length. Now I'm going to tell you exactly why placing the depth limiter correctly is important. Please be sure to watch my demonstration later very carefully. The depth limiter stops the insertion of the clearing stem as it does not fit into the tube's external port. When you properly set the depth limiter, the clearing stem is prevented from exiting the end of the tube. When you measure and place the depth limiter at a shorter distance than your patient's tube, the clearing stem cannot reach the end of the tube and therefore you may not be able to clear all the clogged content. When you measure and place the depth limiter at a longer distance than your patient's tube, the clearing stem may exit the end of your patient's tube. Now back to setup. Now remember, the first step in setting up your clearing stem is to recall your patient's tube length. Jane has a tube 38 centimeters long. Next, we will remove the items from the clearing stem packaging. We will set aside the directions for use and depth limiter. After we have removed the clearing stem from the packaging, we will hang the packaging on the IV pole. This will be used to help maintain clean technique as well as later for disposal. Now, remove the red magnet cover from the magnet adapter of the clearing stem. Place the magnet cover back in the clearing stem packaging as we will use this later for disposal of the used clearing stem. The next step in clearing stem setup is to place the magnet adapter of the clearing stem directly in the center of the diaphragm of the control box, being sure that the red and blue tab is facing upward. If this is not facing directly upward, rotate the clearing stem so that the red and blue tab is in the up direction. Having this in the up direction will ensure easier removal of the component in a later step. Once the magnets of the clearing stem and control box have adhered to each other and the red and blue tab is facing upward, firmly clip the stem lock into the bracket adapter. You may need to push inward and then down to have this happen. Be sure to hear a clicking sound. To ensure that the stem lock is securely in the bracket adapter, tug upward on the clearing stem a few times. It is essential that the stem lock is securely in the bracket adapter for effective operation of the clearing stem. Next, remove the red and blue plastic protector from the clearing stem by pulling directly upward on the blue and red tab. This will release the plastic protector by breaking the blue tape on the opposite side of the plastic protector. Once you have removed the plastic protector, ensure that the stem lock is still firmly clipped into the bracket adapter. Do not operate the TubeClear system until the stem lock is securely clipped into the bracket adapter. Now that the clearing stem is securely attached to the control box, it is time to set the depth limiter to the length that matches your patient's tube. As I stated before, this step is very important for the effectiveness of the device. At the location at which the depth limiter is set will set the amount of clearing stem that is able to be inserted into your patient's tube. In your patient Jane's case, the length of her tube is 38 centimeters. To set the depth limiter, you first need to remove the measuring tape assembly from the plastic sleeve. The measuring tape has a centimeter and an inch side. For this patient, you want to use the centimeter side since Jane's tube is 38 centimeters. Cut or tear the measuring tape at a location that is equal to your patient's tube. Since Jane's tube is 38 centimeters, we will cut at the 38 centimeter mark on the measuring tape. Now, the attached measuring tape is equal to the length of Jane's tube. Next, remove the brown backing from the depth limiter. Set the depth limiter aside so that it does not adhere to anything. Since the clearing stem is secured into the bracket adapter, the control box will help hold one end of the clearing stem. This will allow us to release some of the slack, being sure not to touch any dirty surface with the clearing stem, so that we are holding the clear wire tip protector. Verify that the wire tip is lined up with the 0 mark on the measuring tape. If this is not so, slide the clearing stem in or out of the wire tip protector until the wire tip is aligned with the 0 mark on the measuring tape. This is important as this provides the correct starting point for measuring the placement of the depth limiter. Now that our measuring tape is cut to the length of our patient's tube and the wire tip is lined up with the 0 on the measuring tape, we are ready to set the depth limiter. Hold the clearing stem and measuring tape tightly together. Slide your hand along until you've reached the end of the measuring tape. be sure that there is no slack between the measuring tape and the clearing stem. This is to provide an accurate measurement for the depth limiter. Now I will change positions to make this easy to see. Again, being sure that there is no slack between the clearing stem and measuring tape, I will hold the measuring tape in place. I will line the bottom of the depth limiter up with the cut portion of the measuring tape and place this centered on the clearing stem. Now that the depth limiter is centered on the clearing stem at the location that equals our patient's tube, we will simply fold the depth limiter in half and hold for 5 seconds. Now as you can see, the depth limiter is located at the exact length equal to our patient's tube. The next step is to remove the wire tip protector and discard. We are now ready to use our clearing stem. Also, be sure to complete the checklist located in both the operator's manual and the directions for use to ensure that all necessary steps have been completed before operating your TubeClear system. Is the clearing stem attached to the control box with the stem lock firmly clipped in the bracket adapter? Is the depth limiter attached to the clearing stem at the location that corresponds to your patient's tube length? Has the clearing stem been removed from the clear wire tip cover?
So what we have here is a GI model set up with a AMT 14 French gastric jejunal feeding tube, and we're going to go through some little tips and tricks on how to clear them with the TubeClear clearing stem. Now I have some napkins here. It does get messy. See my nice little face shield? This is the coconut oil, which is used to lubricate the clearing stem to make it easier to traverse this small inner lumen. It's also a silicone tubing, which makes it more tacky. So this is very important here. Now, of course, you will practice clean techniques to prevent this from laying on any dirty surfaces. But for this purpose, just want to show you some techniques on how to get it to transverse the feeding tube here. So first and foremost, as you know, when you want to check, we want to be sure that the feeding tube is clogged. So I got like 15 milliliters here. I put a little pressure on, not too much. I don't want to distort anything. It pushes back after 2-3 cc's. So I definitely got a clog here. I'm going to remove my extension, and I'm going to begin to clear it. So first things first is I coat the clearing stem with the coconut oil. Just stick it down in the pouch, get it on there nice and good. And I'm going to hold the button here, making sure that I go into the J portion. After I insert a little, I'm going to turn on my control box, and that's going to actuate my wire that's inside here. So most importantly, that this space between my fingers and this port has to stay very small, 2 to 4 centimeters. That prevents, if I push and come against the surface, it won't kink, so I stay close. Now I advance in until I feel resistance. Right there's my resistance. Now if I'm back here and I do that, you see it wants to start, and if I do too much force, it's going to bend. So I stay really close, and I use really short back and forth motions. This will help kind of hammer that into the clog. After we do that for a few minutes, sometimes it's good just to pull it nice and slow out to try to spread some of the clog material in the tube, and then just advance back in and go again. Now here is my collar, my depth limiter, to prevent me from going too far in the tube. So as long as this is getting closer to the port, I know I'm advancing. So as long as I can go to my fingers and move back a little and keep advancing. Slow long pulls help spread that out. There I feel a lot more resistance, so it's even more important to be careful with this distance so that I'm not kinking my tube and trying to force it. So it's just this quick alternating between like really fast and then just back and forth. And you see I'm getting much and much more close to my depth limiter, so I'm still advancing. But when it gets to be like really hard to, and I'm advancing much slower, I'll just pull the clearing stem all the way out. This is normally where I would hang it in the bag on the IV pole or lay it on a clean mat. But we're going to go ahead and check the progress of our clearing. Again, just pushing a couple cc's in there to see how it goes. And it did not push back, it actually advanced a little bit, so I made progress in clearing that. Now after a few cc's, it kind of stops. So rather than keep forcing it, I would go ahead and remove that. Pick up my clearing stem again. Each time I take it out, I want to recoat it with the coconut oil. So I'm going to get a good coating on there. You can see that coconut oil is on my clearing stem. Then I can put it into the port and it'll help lubricate how smoothly it goes in. We want to start the actuation. Keeping my fingers close. There's my first sign of resistance. Usually that's just the curves because these silicone ones are a little more tacky and the GI system is obviously curvy. Now here we go. So I stay really close to prevent any kinking. That's the important part. If I'm back here, all I'm going to do is that. It's not going to want to go in. So I stay really close and I go back and forth in short, sometimes rapid, sometimes slower motions. And once I feel my finger go all the way up, I get to move my fingers back a little bit. And here I am, the last little bit. You can tell I'm making it all the way in now with just those short choppy motions. Now this should indicate that I've made it all the way to the end of my feeding tube. So I'm going to take it all the way out, halfway out. Sometimes it's better just so that you go right back through to push a little bit more, because clogged material can reform in areas. Just keep it, especially when you get close to here, it's good to support that so that it doesn't bend. Just short, choppy little motions, and then we're going to pull it all the way out. We're going to go ahead and connect our extender. We have our syringe with water, light pressure for a couple cc's. Oh, well, it helps if I'm doing. Put a little hold, and sometimes, say if I was having, I would go back and forth like this. This is a good idea. Just 2 to 3 notches on your syringe. You just do a little pump action, back and forth like this. It helps spread the stuff out inside the feeding tube. And if you just hold slow, not too much pressure, you wouldn't want to bulge anything. Just a light pressure, hold for 10 to 15 seconds sometimes to see if it's going to go. Just like that. Just a steady pressure to hold for a few seconds, because sometimes it's moving in there, it's moving really slow. I have this nice little model that allows me to see what's going on. You will not. So no force, just steady pressure, 10 to 15 seconds, or a little pumping action back and forth. That allows you to break up some of that clog. So we're set up here as a Mickey gastric jejunal silicone feeding tube through a GI model. As you can see, the air bubble that holds it into the stomach. We got our stoma here, which I will just support with my hand. We are going to hook up our extender, verify that we have a clog. I already have my extension primed. I have my syringe with 15 cc's of water. So I'm going to give it a little push. I can see some water moving, but you see when I release it all pushes right back. I only go about 1 to 2 cc's of pressure so that I don't distort my tube. So we have a clog. So first thing we're going to do after we have our clearing stem all set up, as you can see I already have it hooked to the control box. I have my operator set collar, depth limiter so that I can't go too far, already in place. So this is just tips and tricks on how to get it to advance through, because the geometry, the curvature, and the inner diameter of these make them a little bit more tricky than other types of feeding and decompression tubes. First things first is we're going to stick our clearing stem into our bag of coconut oil, which is recommended for use with these as a lubricant. So we just really get it in there to coat it up, and this will allow it to coat so that it slides on that silicone tacky surface so much easier. As you can see, I have the coconut oil right along there. So just holding that, I want to go ahead and push that in there. As you can see from the pressure, some of that will squirt back out, the fluid that's in the tube. I'm going to turn on my clearing stem. Now the really important thing is that I don't move my hand too far away from the button. I want to keep it close so I can put that forward pressure on without kinking my clearing stem. Now I just hit resistance, which can either be a curve in the feeding tube or my claw. But if I have my hands back here, when I hit that, it's going to go like that. And based on the force, I'm going to end up kinking it and losing all of the actuation of my clearing stem. So I keep within a few centimeters of the button, and I do short little choppy motions until I advance my hands all the way to there. Then I can move them back a little bit and continue like that. This is the very important part. And if I really get stuck in one spot and I'm not going very far, it's good to pull back a little bit, readjust my position, and do it again. Sometimes it's just getting stuck on a curve or pinching in the inner diameter. So you just really want that closeness and that little back and forth motion. You're working with the wire that's also actuating in a little back and forth motion. Do not pinch so hard. You see how I have my hands on here, but if I really pinch it, I'm going to cause a kink there as well. So I'm just holding it just enough to not let it slip through my fingers. Now this is going through pretty well, but let's say that it didn't. We're going to go ahead and I'm stuck in this spot. I'm working on it for minutes and minutes and minutes, and it's not going anywhere, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly pull it out. In the process of removing it, it's going to help spread some of the clogged content that I'm in out through the tube. So I'm going to just slowly take that out. And we're going to take our extension with our flushing syringe. So the important thing is not to apply too much pressure. I can show you what happens when I do apply too much pressure. Let me really close this off. You can see that this will expand, and I can literally start to burst that out. And if I put a lot of pressure on there, I could blow my feeding tube. So we don't want to over pressurize that. So I just usually go about 2 to 3 cc's, hold down 5-10 seconds, go back. There's a back and forth pumping motion. This also helps pull some of that clogged content out. Sometimes you will see it come into your syringe here. As you can see, it really does work just to do that little pumping action. Now I hold also when I will, not too much force, just enough, press down, you'll feel the resistance. I like to hold that sometimes for 10 to 15 seconds, because sometimes within the tube, very slowly as that pressure is just pushing that clogged material out. It's not happening right this second because I did not actually make it all the way to the end of my clog yet. But then I will quit. Now, because we have removed our clearing stem, we are going to recoat it in our coconut oil. Every time you take it out of the tube, you want to recoat it, and as you advance in here, this lubricant will spread through that, making it much easier. So as many times as you need to remove and flush, as many times as you need to recoat with coconut oil. This is an important process we don't want to forget. So I got my coconut oil on there. I'm going to place that clearing stem in through there. Now, I can feel I'm just slowly advancing it in. I haven't met any resistance yet. Now it's starting to get a little tighter, so this is where I'm going to make sure to keep my fingers closed. Use those short, choppy motions, not moving more than a few centimeters away from the button. I can feel the depth limiter getting closer and closer to in my hand, which means I am advancing this whole time. That is a good judge of distance, how far away from this is. If this is getting closer to your button, then you know that the clearing stem is moving further and further into the feeding tube. Now once it gets so close, it's good to hold it for support. Always support it right around the edge of that or in front of it so that we don't end up kinking, bending it around our depth limiter. So we got these few centimeters to go. Just really quick little choppy. And I am up against that, letting me know that I have made it through my feeding tube. I'll back out several inches in a slow, steady motion. And before I pull it the whole way out, go ahead back through, clear up until my depth limiter again. This will be sure that the clogged material didn't just reform and also help to spread it out a little further. Just those short, fast motions. Being careful not to get too far away. You see, this is the danger of being too far away. So we keep it close, we keep it short. We let the clearing stem and the wire do the work. We don't force it. We just short little motions to help it advance through momentum. Does start to get a little slippery right now as my fingers are getting wet. That's okay. Now we've made it all the way back through again. So now I'm going to completely remove the clearing stem. We're going to do a clog check with our extension and our flushing syringe. Again, pull back a little. I like to do that little pumping action. Put a little pressure, 2 to 3, just hold for a few seconds. So just for holding that pressure for a few seconds, sometimes that's very slowly moving and you cannot tell because it's still technically clogging in the tube. So sometimes it's just good to hold that for 10 or 15 seconds, do a little pumping action, and then hold it again, 5, 10 seconds, and then you'll slowly start to feel there's like a little less pressure, a little more release, and that your plunger's advancing a little bit more in your syringe. And that's a good indicator that that clog is moving. Even if it feels like it's not clear, it's moving. So it's good to just give it a couple pumps and then a few seconds of holding that same steady. Here we are going to do some tips on how to use the TubeClear clearing stem to clear the MIC Gastric Jejunal feeding and decompression tube. So first I have my flushing syringe to verify that I have a clog in my tube. I'm going to give it just a little bit of pressure. We don't want to do too much because it can blow the tube out. So I just hold down about 2 to 3 cc's, confirm that it's clogged, try to pull back. Okay, so we are clogged. First things first, after we confirm that our tube is clogged, we want to take our clearing stem and coat it with the coconut oil lubricant. This helps to ensure that the clearing stem can advance through the silicone tubing, as it is a tacky tubing with a lot of curves. This will help it traverse the inner diameter and the geometry of that easier. So we get our coconut oil on our clearing stem end, and we place it a few inches into the port before we go ahead and start our control box. Now, it is a good idea. This neck can be a problem. As you see, it's very flimsy. It wants to fall. It's a good thing to try to keep this as straight as possible while you're using the clearing stem. One, this will make the inner diameter straight and easy for the clearing stem to pass through, plus there will be less contact surface on that silicone. So we keep it straight and we advance as much as we can. We want to keep our fingers as close to the port as we can, so as not to kink the tube out here with too much force by accident as we're advancing. So we push it in as far as we can push it before we feel resistance. Now, I'm going to go ahead and hold this to secure it a little bit and keep my hands here, and I'm going to use really short, fast motions, keeping my fingers as close to this port as possible to not allow kinking of the clearing stem. I will gauge my advancement based on how close my depth limiter is getting to my port, as well as if I get to move my hands back. If I'm constantly keeping them in the same position for too long, I'm either in a bad position on the inside of the tube, or I'm really in a tough clog. So I will do this choppy, short motion. If I go back here, again, it will kink. So we stay close, chop, chop, and then we pull back a few inches, re-enter in the same manner. Sometimes it gives us new positioning, and sometimes it will go ahead and spread that clogged material out of our way, allowing us to have more luck advancing. So even if you realize, see this, it is, I am close, I'm doing a short motion, but it is wanting to push in there. That means the end is stopped. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull my clearing stem out the whole way and do a little flush and aspiration. So I start with just a little pump action. I will pull and push just to get things loosened up if I can. Not too much pressure, just a couple cc's here and there. I will hold a nice steady pressure, not too much. Do not want to blow out my tube here. So I will do a little pump. This often helps stuff inside the feeding tube move around. So I hold it a little, give it about 10 to 15 seconds to see if anything's going to happen, because sometimes it will slowly move things forward. I'll do a little pulling back for aspirating. And then we will go back to clearing with our clearing stem. Now it's important that you always recoat after you remove the clearing stem. So we place it back in our pack of coconut oil, getting it nice and lubricated before we go ahead and put it back in that port. Now again, we want to try to keep this as straight as possible. We want to use as much short motions and momentum to keep it moving forward as possible. The inner geometry of these it can be tricky, so we want to continually keep that clearing stem moving in a forward direction. So short and choppy rather than long, because the long will allow for kinking. So just a little bit at a time. Just inching and inching and inching in there. Do not pinch or squeeze the clearing stem, as it will bend, kink, and that will affect the wire tip from doing its job. As you can see that some of the motion of my is being lost as this neck is flopping back and forth. So it does take a little extra work to get that to transverse clear to the end of my clearing stem. That's why it's important to keep this as straight as possible or secured. Sometimes I pull back a few inches and then re-enter. Now normally we just go 2 to 3 minutes of this action, and we want to take it out and continue flushing and aspirating. Flushing and aspirating helps a great deal. It also moves the stuff that we've already loosened up inside the tube, allowing us to get further. So, little aspiration. Sometimes I'll hold this for a few seconds to see if anything's going to come. Not too much pressure, just a few cc's. Then hold it this way. Pump. And there we go. As I said earlier, we always recoat our clearing stem. Do not get discouraged if this takes a while. These specific tubes have a lot of their own characteristics that require a little extra patience in clearing. Now I feel I've already made it a little bit past where I was the last time. I guess it's a little bit harder for you to know that when you're doing this in a real life scenario, but I have this model here that lets me see where the end of my clearing stem is, and it slowed down around the same spot, but it wants to advance a little wee bit more. So it's a slow process, but we chip away at that clog little bits at a time, moving further and further each time we go in. Sometimes it's good to, after you flush and aspirate, just to let the flushing water sit for a few minutes. This can help soften the clog, as well as give your hands a little bit of rest. It's okay to have a little extra coconut on there. It will spread through this long neck, helping the rest of the clearing stem stay lubricated. We really want to stay close, and sometimes if we feel like we're really not getting anywhere, we get really, really close and do it really quickly back and forth like this, and that'll sometimes get us just past that little edge. Just want to be careful that we're not pinching and we're not letting it bend up in there too much, so just really short, really quick movements. And then as we get up to the end, we move back just a little, keep going. So what happens with these that makes them seem a little bit more difficult and take longer is not only is some of our motion here getting lost with this really long neck, the curvature in here, it's a little bit tighter, so that tends to be a harder spot to traverse through. So when we're losing some of our motion here, it's not making it all the way to the tip. So there's a lot less progress being made down here compared to what we're putting into it up here. So it's just slow. It takes a lot of patience. And a lot of that flushing and aspirating, because every little bit that we knock loose, it's important to spread out and keep loose so that we can make it a little bit further each time. So basically, the process of clearing these specific type, it's just a slow inch by inch, centimeter by centimeter process. Do a little pumping here. Just remember, we do not want to use too much force. You just barely move it 2 to 3 cc's or mils on your syringe so that you're not applying too much pressure. It's okay to hold 10 to 15 seconds. Sometimes that slow, steady pressure allows things to move on their own in there. As long as it's not too much so that you're not blowing anything, distorting the tube. Also, always remember to stop and check that when your control box is on, that you can still see the end of this moving back and forth, letting you know that you did not kink it and it's still got good displacement. So it's also inside there working on that clog. We want to rely on the clearing stem to do most of the work. And we rely on ourselves to just advance it properly and slowly. I like to alternate between these really fast to just like really slow, but still keeping that distance short. And sometimes I'll give a little, just hold a little push to help it go forward. So now, one thing about these tubes that's good to know is that even without a clog, due to the geometry and the material and the curvature and a lot of the characteristics that are just part of having one of these tubes, it can also be difficult to advance all the way through. That's even without any clog. So it's good, rule of thumb, to do preventative maintenance and sometimes just not wait till the tube gets fully occluded, to just run a clearing stem through it and make sure everything is out, or extra flushing all the time, making sure that you're not giving it too much of a chance to build up. Do a little aspirating. It's good to have a lot of napkins after you get that coconut oil on your fingers. I like to do the little pump. It definitely helps push some of that stuff back and forth. Sometimes it's good to just hold a pressure on there for 10 to 15 seconds, not being in any hurry to release it, just in case, as you can see here, very, very slowly some of that stuff is moving through the tube. So if I just keep that pressure, it's slowly coming out. And if you just hold it, not applying extra, not being excessive, just holding it 10 to 15 seconds, not doing anything extra. And even if you know, after 10, 15 seconds, you may need to clear a few more times and do the same thing. There's a lot that you're not going to be aware of that's happening in there. We can show you here in this model. So if I couldn't see what was going on, I would have no idea that any of that stuff just moved down and started to exit my feeding tube. So I'm just going to go right back to my normal clearing procedure, recoating my clearing stem, placing it inside the port, and starting again. Now I don't want to kid you guys. This will take many tries. It's not a quick process. Sometimes it's easier than others. A lot of things can factor into it. One of them being the clog, how the tube is curved in the body, the direction that it's curved, how tight the curves are. So don't lose patience, and if you need to take a break, it's fine to take a break. That can let your flushing fluid soak a little bit, maybe helping soften up the clog. But definitely don't get discouraged if it takes a little bit long. Like I said, a lot of your effort is being lost in this neck that moves around. And really, really take the time to flush and aspirate. This is so important. I'm going to do a little of this, a little of that. And then after I do the pumping of the aspiration and pumping of the flushing, I'm going to push a few cc's down. So I'm going to hold just a couple lines of pressure, just nothing too strong, nothing that takes any effort, just a little bit of pressure so I can feel the pushback. I'm going to hold that for a few seconds, release, and I'll hold it for a few seconds, 10, 15 seconds. I like my last one to always hold a little bit longer just in case. Sometimes up to 20 seconds. And I let go. And if it pushes back a little bit less, then I have a feeling that maybe something's happening in there. So I started up here at 18. I'm down to 17. So that might be going somewhere. Now I just left go and it didn't push back at all. I felt some of that pressure release. So what happened was, as I held that pressure, all of the stuff in this tube was slowly moving and squirted out these ports. As you can see down here, all of it just slowly came out while I held that pressure on there from me loosening it up. With the clearing stem, what I did was put a trail inside that clogged material that allowed the water to get inside of it, and therefore it wasn't just like a solid rock anymore. Now, you can see that there are still materials in here, so even after we get that flushing water to push through there, we're going to go ahead and recoat our clearing stem and go ahead and go into that tube again. And I will show you that even though you've seen that all flushed out, it's still not going to be easy to just rush through to the end of the tube with the clearing stem. And this is why we use that coconut oil. A lot of the tube's geometry, characteristics, the body. A lot of our effort is lost in the motion of this neck. So now that I'm close to the bottom, you can see that I'm getting my depth limiter. It was a long process, even though the tube had flushed out and cleared. So don't get discouraged. Don't think that you're doing something wrong. These tubes tend to just be a little difficult to get through, but not impossible and totally worth it. So once we get all the way up here, we're going to pull out. And then we're going to flush again just to make sure that whatever else was in there loose got out. There we go. Now all 15 cc's went in. It was a process. It's good to take a break if you feel like you need a break or you're getting tired or you just want to let it soak. Do that. It's those short motions, being sure to try to stabilize your neck as much as possible, because that is where a lot of your efforts gets lost in translation from here to the tip of the clearing stem. Always put frequently lubricate, and sometimes it's good to only go in for a minute or two, take it out, relubricate a minute or two. So if it's not moving smoothly and easily in a consistent forwarding motion, reduce the amount of time between removing your clearing stem, relubricating, and your flush and aspirating. That's what will keep this effective. That's just some tips and tricks. And it's different every time.